Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, January the 6th, 2025. Today we do have a fair amount going on. We have got Mars moving back into Cancer, and we've also got a sesquiquadrate between Mars and Saturn. That could be quite a stressful aspect. And in terms of what we know is happening, we know that Kamala Harris, as Vice President, is going to certify the election results. That is the presidential election that took place on November the 5th, 2024. And you could argue that that is the peak of her vice presidency, her final action, the culmination of it all, what she's all about. She was there to usher in Donald Trump, but I will be looking at that, as well as Mars moving back into Cancer and Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn later in the video. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, in a sort of general sense, not talking about necessarily big political events. And usual reminder, if you enjoy this video, I'd be grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe, because it does make a difference to the channel. So let's look at what is happening today. So here is the positions of the planets on midday today, which is January the 6th. And Moon 12 degrees Aries, so it's very much a Moon in Aries day. And we've got Mercury in Sagittarius as well, so we got a couple of planets in fire signs. So Moon in Aries, fairly close to the North Node. That North Node is getting ever closer to Pisces, by the way, ever closer. And by the end of the month, it will change signs, and we'll have to get used to something else. But with that Moon in Aries, fairly close to the North Node, I think it's perhaps a day for action, things that have to be done, things that we want to do, maybe even things that we feel obliged to do. Now, just because we want something to happen doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to be able to make it happen, or we may be able to make it happen, but it may not be easy. And of course, Mars is retrograde, and Mars, you can see Mars at noon New York time where's Mars gone? Actually, noon New York time, Mars is back into Cancer, and so that is kind of a big change. Mars in Leo, in a fire sign, it was retrograde, but it was quite energetic. But now it's back into Cancer. It is moving back into Cancer, and with Mars in Cancer, I think maybe tomorrow I'll talk about Mars in Cancer and what it means in a general sense. But Mars in Cancer gives us the idea, perhaps, of wanting to defend ourselves. We feel that we need to protect our vital interests. That's one way of looking at it. Mars in Cancer can be about applying our energy in an inappropriate way, or just getting too angry about something, but in a way that maybe doesn't sound good. And that may be how other people are coming across. There actually can be something a little bit petulant about Mars in Cancer, remembering that Mars is it's fallen in Cancer, because Mars is exalted in Capricorn, and it's therefore fallen in the opposite sign. So overall, probably not a great sign change, though Mars is not without dignity in Cancer, because Mars does traditionally rule the water signs, the water triplicity. So by triplicity, Mars does have dignity, but still you've got to contrast that with its fallen nature. And when Mars moves into Cancer, it makes a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. And so Mars and Saturn are 135 degrees apart, 3/8 of a circle. And so when you've got Mars-Saturn contacts, you think of frustration, annoyance, anger. Perhaps in extreme situations, I suppose you can think about death and destruction. And some places are going to be impacted more than others. And sort of later in the video, I'll be looking at a few sort of famous people and who could be impacted by Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. I also think actually that Britain will be impacted by Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, but I'll be looking at that at the end of the video. And aside from that, we got Mercury square Neptune. And so Mercury square Neptune, which I just did a video on Mercury square Neptune. Mercury is the way we think and the way we talk, the way we write. And with its square Neptune, we should try to be careful. We might make mistakes, although I suppose Mercury-Neptune contacts can be associated with lying and deception. So that is a possibility. We must make sure we don't become a liar ourselves, and we must watch out for other people. The things they say may not be true. I mean, they may accidentally make mistakes or misspeak. I mean, it could be deliberate, I suppose, in certain situations. And Moon square Sun, it is a first quarter moon. So we had a new moon when was it, December the 30th, 31st. So around a week ago we had the new moon. The new lunar cycle is developing, and now that the Sun is square moon, it's like the first crisis of this lunar cycle, where we start to understand what this lunar cycle is all about. But I don't think it's crisis in a bad sense. I think finally we're seeing action. So I think in some respects that moon square the Sun is quite a good thing. I mean, I suppose we had a new moon in Capricorn, a beginning. Now we've got moon in Aries square Sun in Capricorn. That is the challenge to take action, the challenge to use the opportunities that have been placed upon us, not placed upon us, but the opportunities that have emerged since the new year. And that's probably the main stuff going on. As far as lunar aspects are concerned, the moon is sextile Jupiter. I mean, that's a good aspect. It's not necessarily dramatic, but I think it spurs us to action. And moon in Aries, sextile Jupiter in Gemini, we have our ideas, and we can perhaps act on these ideas, but in a sort of a gentle way. And there is going to be a certain amount of good fortune with that moon sextile Jupiter. Now, so that's the picture in New York, set for noon. Just sort of quickly look at the chart. If we set that chart for Sydney, Australia. So it's the reason I go for Sydney, Australia. Just a reminder, if you're new to the channel, is that I want to give a different perspective, and Australasia is almost a day ahead of the Americas. So that is a problem with doing these kind of charts. That these kind of 12 sign charts. It's difficult to describe just one day in total detail, and when you've got people working on completely different time zones. So here's the position from the perspective of Australia. You can see that at noon in Sydney, Australia being a representative of Australia and New Zealand and East Asia, Kamchatka, Vladivostok, you can see that the moon is at 3 degrees Aries. The moon is still in Aries. It doesn't go back into Pisces unless you're up very early in the morning. So that's the position. I don't think a great deal changes. The moon will eventually make that sextile to Jupiter, but the moon is just earlier in the sign. So I think that's the main difference. Perhaps if you are in Australia or New Zealand, what you might pick up on is a trine between the Moon and Mars, because the Moon, you can see at noon, Mars is still in Leo, unlike noon in New York, and the Moon is making that trine to Mars. So perhaps if you're in Australia or New Zealand, you're able to perhaps be more energetic in a sort of more playful kind of way than if you're in the Americas. In the Americas and Europe, I think you might find that things are a little bit more serious. So let me just turn back to the New York chart. Okay. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at the heliocentric positions. So that's the chart from a perspective of the geocentric solar system. And if we turn to the heliocentric solar system, with putting a sun in the middle, we get this chart here. And Mars is now exactly square Chiron. And so that might be a feature of today. And Mars square Chiron may be a feeling that we have to do something differently. And we perhaps want to get noticed. And in terms of our assertion, we may have to assert ourselves to get noticed, to show the world that we are different. But it might also be the case that something might make us angry. Perhaps we get a sense of injustice, a sense that something is wrong, that a sense that someone is hurting and they've been treated unfairly. So that might be a few ways in which the Mars-Chiron square is working. Also, heliocentrically, Venus is moving into Gemini. I know geocentrically Venus is in Pisces, but heliocentrically it's in Gemini, and heliocentrically Venus is starting to make a trine to Pluto. So Venus trine Pluto, probably not a bad aspect. I think Venus trine Pluto may make us perhaps a little more intense than usual and a little more controlling. Venus trine Pluto, we do want to be in control, don't we, with that aspect. And I suppose in terms of relationships, we're thinking about who's in control of who. And Venus trine Pluto can also be about art and how we create things and the kind of style we try to create. And I suppose we're trying to create something that attracts attention, that perhaps draws people in a somewhat subtle though intense kind of way. And another reminder, that the Earth is slowly moving towards a conjunction to Mars. This is inevitable. So there's the Earth. So remember, Earth is 16, 17 Cancer, Capricorn, geocentrically. Heliocentrically, it's heliocentrically. We don't look at the Earth. So we don't look at the Sun. The Sun is in Capricorn. The Earth is in Cancer, and the Earth is moving towards a conjunction of Mars. Perhaps we're just starting to pick up on this a little bit now. I mean, it does. It's an aspect that does happen once a year, approximately, but it's actually the Earth-Mars cycle heliocentrically is going to be longer than once a year, because Mars keeps moving on. So it's an aspect that maybe we need to actually take notice of, and that Earth-Mars conjunction could be quite violent, actually. And I think perhaps we need to look at it in detail, maybe in a week or two's time. I mean, the Earth this is a planet we're living on, and it's moving to this conjunction of Mars. And we do know that when you look at the heliocentric picture and you see Earth in Cancer, that's also Sun in Capricorn, and we've got we've got a full moon coming up. I think there's a full moon on January the 13th, and this full moon on January the 13th is going to be reasonably close to Mars. It's a few degrees off Mars, and that's something we need to be looking at. And Mars will move on geocentrically, and it will move to it will move fairly close to the actual position of the full moon. So in fact, that full moon on January the 13th is at 24 Cancer. So when Mars actually moves to 24 Cancer, then we might expect something to happen of a Mars nature. I think actually Mars is at 24 Cancer around the time of the inauguration day. But anyway, I'm rambling. I need to get on with the 12 signs. So let me now do my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, January the 6th, 2024. Aries. Sorry, it's Monday, January the 6th, 2025. Anyway, let's go. Aries. Aries, Mars is your ruler. And so Mars is changing sign. Mars is going back from Leo into Cancer. So with Mars going back into Cancer, you perhaps feel more defensive than usual. And you might feel that in some way you have to start protecting yourself, and you might be quite wary of all the things that could undermine you. And from an anger perspective, Mars in Cancer can be quite an angry placement for Mars. There are things annoying you, and it's not always easy to express that annoyance. And when you do express it, it may come over in a somewhat clumsy way. Now, Mars is going to be in Cancer for quite a long time. I mean, it finally moves into Leo, I think, in April the 18th. So you better get used to Mars being in Cancer. And I think you will, but it's just the first few days of Mars's sign change might be a little bit of a shock to the system. And you shouldn't think that you're quite as strong as you think you are. You might just want to do things in a slightly different way and be slower about it, and just not feel that you can just get instant results. And this is especially the case today when Mars is a sesquiquadrate Saturn. So Mars is 135 degrees from Saturn. And so that aspect to Saturn, it can be a very frustrating influence. I mean, Saturn can hold you back. It can tell you, no, you can't do it. And you can be held back by many different things. You can be held back by real life obstacles, people saying no, that's possible. But you can also get held back by your own feelings. Something is bothering you. Something doesn't feel right. So you do have to have another look at how you're going to assert yourself, and you have to perhaps be clever about it. And I suppose with Mars moving into Cancer, I suppose you have to think about the symbol for Cancer, which is a crab, and crabs are supposed to walk sideways, aren't they? And so that might mean that if you want to take action, be assertive, it's not about head-on assaults. You have to look at your obstacle from a sideways approach and be prepared to go round. And the crab is also a good symbol to look at, because the crab is an animal which is defended. It's got a thick shell, and So, do consider your own defenses rather than be thinking about the attack. Think about how would you defend yourself. I mean, I'm not saying you're going to be vulnerable to literal attack, but you just have to understand the times in which you're living in. Now, to make things a little more complicated, the moon is in Aries. The moon is in your sign. So usually when the moon goes into Aries, if you've been watching my videos, I don't know, over the last few months or even years, it was not quite 2 years since I started this channel. And so I'm usually quite positive about the moon moving into Aries when I'm looking at Arians, and I generally regard this as being a good day, a day when you can assert yourself. And the moon is in Aries. I think you're going to want to assert yourself, and in a way, I think you should be. It is the right thing to be doing, and it may be that there are things that do make you angry. I mean, heliocentrically, we've got Mars square Chiron, and that might be about the injustices of the world, and you feeling you just have to say something, but because of other reasons, you can't just be completely tactless, just acting on a whim. It's not really like that. But still, with Moon in Aries, you do want to make things happen. And I think you can make things happen, just provided you're subtle. The Moon does make a sextile to Jupiter. And it just may be that if you just pause, use your mind, and use your words as well with that Moon sextile Jupiter, you can make an impact, and you can get people to take you seriously and to listen to your demands, but just be subtle about it. And yes, use the power of your words, and your words, the right words, can allow you to get your way in the end. Taurus, it is a somewhat complicated day. I mean, not just for you. I think for everyone. And the moon is moving into Aries, and so with the moon moving into Aries, you may feel that you don't necessarily want to participate. I mean, sure, there are things happening, but do you actually want to get involved? You might take the view that no, probably not, because things might seem too complicated, and what you want is definition. You want to do things which are clearly defined, and finding that definition today may actually be hard work, and at the same time you could feel pretty tense. Sure, there are things you want to do, but you're just aware of everything that could be holding you back, and so that's something that you really need to think about. So don't feel that you have to act, and don't necessarily give in to outside pressure. And there's also this tension, wanting to do something but knowing you can't do it, and this tension may be picked up on by other people, especially as it's a tense day. I think it is a tense day for everyone, Taurians included. With that Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, Mars moving into Cancer, sesquiquadrate Saturn, and so how might that aspect influence you as a Taurian? Well, it might not influence you directly, but it could influence some of the people around you. People are going to, I think, be tense, annoyed, frustrated, feeling they can't do what they want to do, and I suppose there's some possibility that they might be tempted perhaps to, I won't say take it out on you, but they might be rather thin-skinned if you're in their way, or if you say something they don't approve of. So yeah, other people may be jumpy, and that is a good reason why you should perhaps not feel that you have to do anything today. Now, heliocentrically, there is a trine between Venus and Pluto, and I think you might be impacted by that trine. And perhaps that trine between Venus and Pluto is something you can use. You know, Venus trine Pluto is about being subtle, getting people to do things your way, but not directly. You know, understanding your power and realizing that over displays of power are not going to work. But if you're able to sort of act behind the scenes, perhaps use your knowledge of human nature, you can, I think, in the end, get your way. And as far as relationships are concerned, don't make assumptions. Because today, some people might be experiencing a bit of a change. I mean, you may have noticed people changing. And, that's because Mars has been moving from Leo into Cancer. And they're just not very sure of themselves. And that's why some people are a bit sort of angry and tense, because they don't know. They'd like to know, but they don't know. And in one sense, they're not very decisive. I mean, in a meaningful way, but in another sense, they don't want to be pushed. They don't want other people making decisions for them. So Taurus, just understand other people and make an allowance for them. And I think the situation will start to ease in a couple of days' time, perhaps when the moon moves into Taurus, which is, of course, your sign. Gemini, it's a difficult day for many people. A lot of people just seem to be upset about stuff. They feel somewhat frustrated. They can't do what they want to do. Yeah, you're very aware of it. I don't think that you yourself need to be massively impacted by it. And I think that to an extent you can carry on as normal, especially as there is a sextile between the moon and Jupiter. So, the moon is in Aries and it's sextile Jupiter, which is in Gemini. So, Jupiter's still in Gemini. It stays in Gemini until May. And so with that moon sextile Jupiter, I think you can be very positive. You can keep smiling. And it may be important to keep smiling given what's happening today. As I said, today is difficult. A lot of people feel frustrated. They can't do what they want to do. They're annoyed. But just be a Gemini. Just don't take anything too seriously, and try to be optimistic, as I actually think you can be with this moon sextile Jupiter, and don't allow your imagination to run away with you. I mean, you've got a very vivid imagination, I think, at the moment, because Mercury is making a square to Neptune. And so, Mercury is in Sagittarius. Mercury in Sagittarius is about perhaps far-flung ideas, thinking about what might be possible, even if you're not being particularly realistic about it. And then it's square Neptune. Yeah, there is an element of fantasy about that. But I don't think that's necessarily too much to worry about, provided you don't let your fantasies get out of hand. I mean, we all fantasize. We all have ideas about what is possible. And of course, I'm speaking as a Gemini, and with my sun in Gemini, my mind is always working, trying to think about what is possible, and often reaching the wrong conclusions, and thinking something can happen when it has no chance of happening, perhaps even when I know it's got no chance of happening, but I'm still thinking about it. And that's Mercury square Neptune. So enjoy your fantasies, enjoy your imaginings, but don't take it too seriously. and this may particularly apply when you're communicating, when you're dealing with other people. In terms of what you say, you want to make a special effort, I think, to be realistic, because there's just a danger that you may say something that you haven't really thought through, and it may be that you're not particularly sure of your facts, so perhaps you should avoid conversations or arguments where you need sort of detailed information. It's like with me, and this is an astrology channel. I mean, the reason it's an astrology channel is because I think I know about astrology, and I think I know enough to deal with people's comments. So if someone asks me a question or questions what I'm doing, I think I can defend myself. Now, I talk a lot about politics in this channel. If this was a politics channel, it would be a disaster. I mean, I have lots of opinions about politics, but politics is complicated. There are details, there are policy details that you need to know about, and it's easy to jump to conclusions about political issues. You think you know it, but as soon as you run up against someone who knows what they're talking about, you can really sort of get yourself into trouble. And so it's perhaps a bit like that with Mercury square Neptune. You need to stick to what you know about. Don't stray into areas that you think you know about it. You know a few facts, but you haven't really gone into the details, because it's quite possible that you might but someone you know or someone you come across knows more about the subject than you, and I suppose they could make a fool of yourself. But Mercury square Neptune can be about deception and lying. You may be tempted to deceive and to lie. It might feel like a good way of getting out of a difficult situation. It's not a situation you should be involved in, but I suppose it could happen. And also, Mercury square Neptune, it's about the way you think, it's the way your mind works. And you may be slightly vulnerable to picking up information which is wrong, or people telling you stuff that you want to believe in, but actually it's not good for you. It's not actually going anywhere, and so be careful about deceiving other people, because you might just do it not deliberately, but you just might do it by accident. And again, be careful about being the recipient of someone else's deceptions. So if you get convincing calls on your phone, I don't know, the usual stuff. You need to take urgent action, otherwise the IRS will investigate you. You know the kind of call that you need to take. Don't believe what people tell you over the phone, and check that if you've never talked to them before, some robocall, that kind of thing. Maybe with Mercury square Neptune, you have to be a bit careful. And with communications in general, if you're trying to say something important or deliver a message that's important, make sure the wording is right, and maybe you shouldn't deliver that message today unless it's really important, because it's possibly not a great time for communicating, especially if that communication really matters. Cancer, the moon is in Aries all day long. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon might be in late Pisces at the very, very beginning of the day, middle of the night kind of thing. But I think we can safely say that the moon is in Aries today. And when the moon is in Aries, I like to tell Cancerians that it really is a time to do stuff, make things happen, to assert your authority. I mean, it's a new year. Perhaps it's the first time that you're really starting to connect with the challenges of 2025, and so you don't hold back. And if you feel you need to be noticed, then be noticed. Other people probably need you. As I've told other signs, it is a difficult day. It can be a frustrating day. Things might not go to plan, and sometimes people need a bit of guidance, and that guidance could come from you. And you perhaps have to be quite assertive about it, especially as Mars is now moving into your sign. So Mars moving into Cancer, and it stays in Cancer for quite a long time, until April. I mean, normally Mars stays in a sign for, I think it's usually about, when it's going at maximum speed, it's usually about 6 weeks. But Mars is now going to be in Cancer for over 3 months. So get used to Mars being in Cancer. And so with Mars moving in Cancer, it is about you being assertive, looking after yourself, looking after your own interests, and at times getting angry if something isn't going to plan. Now, you always have to be careful about getting angry, and this might be a particular issue while Mars is going retrograde. So Mars goes retrograde, I think, until the German federal elections on February the 23rd. I think it's around February the 23rd that Mars goes direct. And so with Mars going retrograde through your sign, you need to look after yourself. You want to look after yourself, and I think you can look after yourself. And today, with the moon moving through Aries, it is a reminder that now's the time to stand up and perhaps begin to make things happen, and tell people how you feel. And if you're in a setting of where you're in authority, or you're managing other people are looking for you for guidance, even if you're not working, you can still be in a position where people are looking to you for guidance. They want to know what to do, and you're able to tell them what to do. You've certainly got a good idea about what should be done, and you can be very assertive about it. And the moon is conjunct the North Node, and so that tells me that it is absolutely the right thing to be doing. People do need to know about you and what you want, and that North Node is becoming very prominent because it's close to the Aries point. I mean, the true node is at 0 degrees 26 Aries. It's moving backwards, of course. The Aries, by and large, the node always moves backwards, although the true node it does go backwards, but there are times where it goes forward, so it sort of zigzags backwards. And so with the moon conjunct the North Node in Aries, it is definitely a time Cancer when you need to be noticed. And the moon does make a sextile to Jupiter, and that sextile to Jupiter does mean that you are, to an extent, I think, protected. There's something making sure that you stay out of trouble, and there's also something perhaps giving you guidance. Jupiter is in Gemini. It's, from a Cancer perspective, it's in a low profile position, but it's very much there, and it is helping you, it's protecting you. And Jupiter as a planet does have a special association with Cancer. It doesn't rule Cancer, obviously. The moon rules Cancer, but the Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So in a way, you could argue that Jupiter almost rules Cancer. You could say, well, it rules Cancer by exaltation. And so with the moon sextile Jupiter, it's possible that something you do in a fairly secretive way can work to your advantage. So it may be that there's you out there getting noticed, but there's also a part of you which is acting behind the scenes. So it's perhaps today you've got a performance which is supported by secret activity, and maybe you just know things that other people don't know, and maybe also you've just done some preparation. So if you are making big moves today, you feel you have to make some big moves, then I think that your behind the scenes preparations can actually make quite a big difference. Leo. Well, it was nice having Mars moving through your sign. I think, when did Mars go into Leo? I mean, Mars went into Leo around the time of the presidential election, beginning of November 2024. And it's now leaving Leo. And it leaves Leo until April. So for the next 3 months, Mars is in Cancer. And so you could say, Leo, that this puts less pressure on you. I think that when Mars was moving through your sign, you might have felt that there were really things that you had to do, things that you wanted to do. You really wanted to get going on them. But now that Mars is out of Leo, just may feel that there's less pressure, and perhaps some of your big ideas, your big plans, you might want to put them on ice. So it could be, for example, there was something you really wanted to do, you were getting ready to do it, and then circumstances changed. And they could have been changing as early as November, as Mars started slowing down. And of course, then December the 6th, I think it was December the 6th, Mars went retrograde. And you perhaps began to realize that things were going to be even slower than expected. And so it may just be that some things, Leo, have to be postponed until the spring, until April, when Mars moves into your sign. But as far as today is concerned, we don't want to sort of get completely obsessed with Mars moving into Cancer. I think there are other things going on. We have got the Moon in Aries, and the Moon in Aries, I think, is encouraging you to look at things in a different way. Perhaps with Mars in Leo, you've been too quick to sort of put your energy into one thing, and you put all your energy into one thing, and you were perhaps not considering other possibilities. But now Mars is moving out of Cancer. Now Mars is moving out of Leo, and the Moon is moving into Aries. This is a chance to broaden your horizons, and perhaps to be a little bit experimental, to be experimenting with new ideas, considering new possibilities, and maybe being able to take advantage of them, perhaps with other people's help, because the Moon in Aries does make a sextile to Jupiter, and it's this aspect is it's not a dramatic aspect, but I would have said it was fortunate, and it does indicate that when you're with other people, there's a sense that things are happening. There's a sense that people can get on with each other. And so Moon sextile Jupiter could be about socializing. It could be about learning about the world and its possibilities through other people. It's not that you have to do anything. You just have to consider what might be possible at a future date. And as it is, January the 6th, I suppose, isn't it January the 6th, you're supposed to take the Christmas decorations down? I mean, that was a tradition certainly in the UK. January the 6th is that the 12th day of Christmas? I get mixed up. It's Three Kings Day, I think. That's what they... I never really came across this festival, sort of Three Kings Day. In Slovakia, I think it was quite important. I think it's January the 6th. But anyway, your Christmas decorations had to be down by January the 6th. And if Christmas decorations were not down by January the 6th, it was considered to be unlucky. I don't know how that works in other countries. Maybe it's even a forgotten tradition in the UK. But I certainly had that idea that you needed to get the Christmas decorations down by January the 6th. Fortunately, in this house, there are no Christmas decorations, so that's not something we have to worry about. But yeah, things are returning to normal, and that moon sextile Jupiter is a time to just get in contact with people. Perhaps over Christmas you'd not fallen out with them, but they'd done their own thing, they got involved with their family and whatever, but now you can get in touch. So if you've been meaning to get in touch with someone, on a light level, perhaps to do with friendship, moon sextile Jupiter, would be a good time to do it. But it may be someone has got something to offer you, at the very least in terms of ideas and possibilities, and perhaps you should listen to what they say, because it might be quite inspiring. Virgo, we do have to look at Mercury. I mean, Mercury is an important planet in Virgo's astrology because it's your ruler, and at the moment Mercury is in very late Sagittarius, getting ready to move into Capricorn, but it's not in Capricorn yet, and it is making a square to Neptune. So with Mercury square Neptune, things can be a little bit confusing. As a Virgo, you perhaps want things to be simple, you want things to be straightforward, but how straightforward can they be when Mercury is aspecting Neptune? It may be that there are things happening that you don't fully understand, and it could be that certain people are just not being clear. You'd like them to be clear, you'd like them to tell you what's on their mind, and you'd want to know about what their plans are, and you'd also want to be able to believe what they say. And I think that that might not be possible, especially if you are in touch with someone who you don't know very well, and they say things which sound slightly incredible, and you have a question over what they're saying and why they're saying it, then your suspicions might be justified. So do not take people at face value. Don't take what they say at face value. And that probably includes people you know well, even your family. They might be very sure of things, but do they really know what they're talking about? And it's possible also that you pick up information that is incorrect. It feels right. You want to use this information, but you find that it doesn't actually make sense in the end. And it wouldn't make sense if you kind of had a critical mind right from the beginning, but there's a slight danger, Virgo, that you take things at face value. I mean, I know Virgos do have a critical mind. That's part of a hallmark of being a Virgo, but maybe that's a stereotype. But with Mercury making a square to Neptune, I just think there is some danger that you just do take something at face value, and you therefore make a mistake. And instead, Virgo, you've got to be prepared to really look at things deeply, look under the surface, and not take things at face value. Ask questions, and then ask more questions, and don't believe anything anyone says, even if normally they're completely trustworthy. And the moon does make a sextile to Jupiter, and that suggests to me that in the end, if you make the effort, you can get in touch with the truth. It really is possible, but you're just going to have to do a lot of digging, and you just don't take things at face value. And also, stick to what you know and trust. I mean, that's often a good way of protecting yourself from being deceived, whether you're being deceived by another person, whether you're perhaps deceiving yourself. Just stick to what you know. And that might sound a bit boring, but it won't last so very long. Remember, Mercury is about to move into Capricorn, and in a day or two's time, Mercury will be in Capricorn, and things will be very different. But right now, Mercury in late Sagittarius is in a somewhat vulnerable position. You're just not particularly sure of yourself, and therefore you feel that you shouldn't be making decisions, and you certainly don't want to be pushed into making decisions today, because I think there's just as good danger that those decisions in the end will show themselves to be perhaps based on something which was entirely wrong. Though finally, I think, Virgo, you do still have a great sense of your own power, and I think you would like to change things. I think that feels very important to you. Maybe it's now occurring to you that the new year has started. You don't want this year to be like last year, and so you are looking for some kind of dramatic change, and you perhaps feel that you are the person that could bring that change into being. And I think that is reasonable, but I would suggest that you avoid doing anything too dramatic today. I mean, today might be the day for doing the groundwork, for asking questions, for understanding what's happening out there, so that you can create change based on correct information. And that correct information is not going to be available today, I don't think. But though I do think that in a day or two's time, when the moon moves into Taurus, when Mercury moves into Capricorn, you'll be in a much better position to take action, and for being constructive, and to really start to get your teeth into the challenges of 2025. Libra, the moon is now in Aries, and Mars is moving into Cancer. And both those sign changes are important to you. Perhaps that Mars moving into Cancer in particular. So if you've been watching this video so far, you might have noticed that I might have been a little bit negative about Mars moving into Cancer. It just might feel that I'm suggesting that it represents putting a lot of energy into something with just too much anger and just too much emotion, and perhaps being a little too protective about it. But I think this Mars moving into Cancer for you might be a good thing. It allows you to go back over old ground, and just to consider some of the things you were perhaps working on last year. You were perhaps trying hard to succeed, and maybe you felt that you weren't 100% successful. But now, Libra, you can perhaps give things another chance, because Cancer in the Libran chart is about your ambitions, what impact you're trying to have, what you're trying to achieve. And I think that with Mars moving into Cancer, you are going to get back in touch with some of your ambitions, and you're going to perhaps want to put things into action again, give it another go. And you shouldn't feel that you are alone, because the moon moving into Aries and Mars moving into Cancer means that the moon and Mars are in mutual reception. I mean, this is not something I've mentioned so far. I kind of forgot to mention it, but Mars is in Cancer, which is a sign ruled by the moon. Moon is in Aries, a sign ruled by Mars. So when you've got this Moon-Mars mutual reception, I think that might mean that certain people can be helpful. So if there's something you feel that you want to achieve and you perhaps haven't achieved it in the past, then it may be that with another person's help you can actually get what you want, or perhaps get some good advice. So it may be a time, Libra, which in a strange way is quite exciting, because you feel that something can happen, perhaps something that you'd actually given up on now becomes a real possibility. But I think in many cases that will be with some outside help. Now, as far as other people are concerned in general, the moon is moving into Aries, and the moon is making a conjunction to the North Node. And so with the moon North Node conjunction in Aries, it may not be an exact conjunction, but still it's there, and it is the right thing to do, to be paying attention to other people, paying attention to their needs, seeing how they can help you, and also seeing how you can help them. And so being aware of that social dimension, I think, could be really useful. And you shouldn't think that it's a situation where you don't have any power. I mean, from a heliocentric perspective, Venus is trine Pluto. So Venus trine Pluto is actually about your ability to create transformation. So if you are not happy with the way things are, you can create favourable change. And I don't think it's going to be that difficult. It may be a situation where you just have to, tell people what's on your mind, tell people what you want, and I think they'll listen to you, and you're quite likely to get a sympathetic reception. And at the same time, Libra, I think that you do have, at the moment, a great desire for freedom. You're not going to appreciate having people, telling you what to do, doing things in other people's way. That doesn't mean to say that you have to pick fights, and I think other people are there for you. But at the same time, you want to be free, and you want to be able to break free from something. And in fact, today you may have a chance to break free from something. It may be an obligation. It may just be a responsibility that had been driving you crazy. You said you have to do something. You keep doing it, and it's not right, but you just haven't got it together to break some connection, or to tell someone you're not going to do it anymore. But with the current planetary situation, I think you can make the break. You can today just announce no more. That's enough. Not in a general sense, not in terms of everything. It's just one thing you're doing, perhaps of just a routine nature. You're just doing it every day. You've stopped almost thinking about why you're doing it. You're just doing it. You don't like doing it. And you might have another look at it and you say, oh, hold on, this whole thing is pointless. You don't have to do it. And if you stop doing it, maybe no one's going to mind. And if they do mind, well, too bad, because you're sick of it. So that is a possibility. So in some respects, Libra, I think it can actually be a day when you can gain your freedom. Scorpio, Mars is doing stuff, and Mars is your ruler, and so we have to pay attention to this. So Mars is changing sign. It's moving backwards out of Leo into Cancer. And that is a good thing, and it's a bad thing. I mean, nothing's too bad. That's probably an exaggeration. I mean, it's more of a good thing than a bad thing, I think, overall. But when Mars was in Leo, and Mars has been in Leo since, I think, the beginning of November. I think that has made you fairly ambitious. I think there are things, Scorpio, that you wanted to do. You wanted to get it all off the ground, and you may have found that some of the things you were struggling to do just weren't working as well as expected, and there might have been a sort of certain sense of frustration. And maybe at the moment, with Mars making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, perhaps those frustrations are very clear. But at the same time, Mars is now moving into Cancer. So what does that mean? Well, Cancer is a water sign, and Scorpio is a water sign. So Mars moves into a sign where it is concordant with you, and perhaps you need to rethink, where you put your energy for the next couple of months. And with Mars moving into Cancer, it's perhaps a time to be thinking about the big picture, what it's all about, meaning. And so many Scorpios between now and April, when Mars moves back into Leo, but between now and April, there may be work to do in terms of, your fundamental belief system, and, what you believe in, whether that's politically, ideologically, spiritually, and at the same time, getting a sense of the big picture, realizing that you are part of a wider system. You're part of the human race. Well, indeed, it goes beyond the human race, doesn't it? It's the whole creative vision. I mean, if you can feel part of that, that would be great. I mean, from a sort of a spiritual sense. And I suppose we have to say that, with Mars moving back into Cancer and it being in Cancer till April, some Scorpios may start to think about travel. They may feel that they want to go somewhere new. I mean, everyone wants to travel, don't they? But as you know from these videos, if you've been watching them, I'm not a fan of traveling. I mean, in a literal sense, because you've got to think of the environment, haven't you? You've got to think about global warming. I mean, I know people say, well, what's one seat on an aeroplane? I mean, it's pretty theoretical talking about the melting of the sea ice, one seat on a plane. But, as a Scorpio, you realize that if enough people decided not to travel, that flight would be cancelled. And if that flight was cancelled, maybe more flights would be cancelled. And if it became unacceptable to travel, through your example, then, that would be good, wouldn't it? But I'm just giving you my completely subjective view of the world. You may feel you need to travel at some level over the next few months. And so I suppose I have to say, if there's somewhere you want to go to, you might feel, go do it. Perhaps. Though, remember, Mars is moving retrograde. And in fact, Mars moves retrograde, I think it's until about February the 23rd, the German federal elections, just around the time of the German federal elections. It changes direction, I think, on the 24th. I think Mars goes direct on the is it February the 24th? I think it's February the 24th. So February the 24th, Mars goes direct. And so I think between now and February the 24th, you should just accept that Mars is going retrograde and not feel that you necessarily have to do anything. It's February the 23rd, 24th, depending on your time zone. So while Mars is going retrograde, you might feel that you want to sort things out, you want to plan things, plan travels, but I wouldn't, because you might have to reschedule, or you might change your mind. And it probably won't be until the end of February that you're ready to really commit to doing something of an expansive nature, perhaps like traveling. So that's looking at things perhaps on a more long-term level. Looking at things on a shorter-term level, we've got Mars moving into Cancer, and we've got the moon moving into Aries. So what that means is that over the next couple of days, the moon and Mars, or the next, I don't know, it depends on your time zone, certainly the next day or two, the moon and the Mars are in mutual reception. So with the moon and Mars in mutual reception, in general, that does give you a boost. And it puts you in, I think, in a fairly strong position, and I think you feel quite confident, and also your efforts to make sense of things should work out really well. So if you feel, for example, that things are disorganized, that maybe other people are disorganized, that you don't know what's happening, you feel confused, you can sort it out very, very quickly with this Moon-Mars mutual reception, because you will have a vision about the way things should be, and you'll be able to bring that vision down to earth. And I think that people will listen to you, even if there aren't any people around you. It's just things, objects will just move as you want them to move, almost. I mean, I'm not really talking about telekinesis or anything like that, but the next best thing is things will just be easy to move around, and you can create an environment that you're comfortable with. And this moon mutual reception Mars may also have implications for health. I would have said fortunate implications for health. It does seem that the things you do over the next day or two can be good for you. So if there's anything you want to change around, it's a new year, new routines, new diets, getting rid of things that are bad for you, now would be a great time to be making those kind of changes. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, there are some changes going on. We have gains in one fire sign, losses in another fire sign. I don't know whether losses is quite the right word, but we did have Mars moving through Leo. Remember, Sagittarius is a fire sign, and so that was nice having Mars moving through Leo. But then Mars leaves Leo, goes back into Cancer, and then we've got the moon, which perhaps was in Pisces, is now in Aries. So you're losing one fire sign, which is Leo, but you're gaining another one, which is Aries. Of course, the moon doesn't stay very long in Aries. It just, for the next day or two, whereas Mars stays in Cancer until April. So there is a bit of a difference there. But I think, Sagittarius, you are feeling that the energies are somewhat changing, that things weren't like what they were before. I think with the moon moving into Aries, I think it can be a satisfying day. I mean, you're perhaps able to tune into what you're good at and what you have perhaps been put on the planet for. I know that sounds a bit over dramatic, but today you do seem to be very much in tune with what you're here for. And so if you've got a purpose, I think that today you can do it, and you can do it in a way that you feel very comfortable with. It just feels incredibly natural. But there is a certain seriousness creeping in, and I think that seriousness is caused by the fact that Mars is moving out of Leo and into Cancer. So the sign Cancer, I mean, on the surface has very little to do with Sagittarius, although Jupiter has kind of rulership of both signs. I mean, Jupiter has rulership of Cancer through what's not quite rulership, but Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So so there's a certain link there, and Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So it's perhaps with Mars moving into Cancer, it's not an entirely alien thing, but it's still something new to have to deal with. And I think with Mars moving into Cancer, perhaps you are going to be putting perhaps more of your energy into things that are complicated, and that might be something you want to do over the next day or two, with the moon making a mutual reception between the moon and Mars. So that moon moving through Aries does have a relationship with Mars in Cancer because they're in each other's signs. And so perhaps you can enjoy yourself today in a way that is very focused. It's not trivial. I know that sometimes Sagittarius has a reputation for making light of things, but I think at the moment there's nothing trivial about you at all. You know that some things are important, and you do want to take them seriously. And you know also that if you're doing the right thing and you're taking it seriously, in a way you can't be stopped. And if anything comes up, if there's any sort of obstacles, something trying to prevent you doing what you need to do, you'll be able to assert yourself, I think, very powerfully, and in certain cases very, very dramatically. So you can see that it is a somewhat complex day with Mars moving into Cancer. And Mars doesn't just move into Cancer, it makes a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. And so with Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, that perhaps gives us more information about what you may feel you're struggling with. And there may be issues with your family. I mean, when you look at your family and perhaps your home in general, you may feel that there are certain things going on which are a little bit frustrating, and you may just feel that your freedom of action is being constrained by obligations that you have to your home, to your family. And, these are obligations that you can't just get out of. You can't make a radical break from it all, but you kind of have to work with them. You have to work with these constraints and, I suppose, be quite mature about it and realize, what can be done, and also being careful not to take what anyone says at face value. And that could be an issue today, not just an issue for you, but an issue for a lot of people, because we have Mercury square Neptune. So Mercury for you may represent another person. I mean, not necessarily a member of your family, just someone you meet, someone who is trying to communicate with you, and they're saying something, and what they say on the surface might seem plausible, but actually, if you think about it, it's not plausible at all. And so Sagittarius, when listening to people, particularly if they're making claims and sort of quoting facts at you which seem unsupported, you need to take it with a pinch of salt, because someone might be deceiving themselves. And indeed, they might be trying to deceive you. Not necessarily deliberately, but they feel they know the truth, they feel they know the answers, and actually when you do a bit of digging, and with that Mars moving into Cancer, I think you're certainly going to be able to do some digging. When you do some digging, you'll realize that claims which seem obvious, that people are very certain about, are actually based on nothing. And so it's important that in terms of facts coming in from the outside, you are very questioning today. Capricorn, Mars is moving into Cancer, and Mars stays in Cancer until April. And so you've got, for 3 months and more, you've got Mars moving into Cancer, moving through Cancer, which is your opposite sign. And so that may say something about relationships of all kinds. And it just may be that over the next few months you feel that certain people are somewhat aggravating. I mean, you don't necessarily want to spend too much time worrying about other people's problems, what other people are talking about, but you might still find yourself having to do so. And so perhaps you need to rethink about how you are engaging with other people and being aware that they could take up a lot of your time and a lot of your emotional energy unless you're very careful. Though, Mars does stay in Cancer for a long time, over 3 months. So I think you're going to get used to it. But it just may be that as Mars makes that same sign change today, the next couple of days, it may be a question of acclimatization. So that might be, one thing going on. And also, Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. So, of course, Saturn is your ruler. So with Mars making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, that might indicate that someone is annoying you. It's about an irritation. And perhaps you need to think about how you could be annoyed by people. And this irritation might manifest through talking, through conversation, through argument. So when you are talking to people today, there could be a sense of irritation and a sense of even of deadlock. If you're trying to discuss something, you might not feel you're getting anywhere, and that won't be helped by the fact that Mercury is making a square to Neptune. Mercury square Neptune is a planet, is an aspect which could cause confused information, people not knowing what they're talking about, people trying to deceive each other. So you've got that Mercury square Neptune anyway, and then you've got Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. So there is an issue here in terms of agreement, disagreement, and just in general feeling that there are things out there that are irritating you. And yeah, it may be certain people who are irritating you. But Mars, when it moves into Cancer, it does make a mutual reception to the moon. And that means that the moon and Mars are in each other's sign. Moon is in Aries, Mars is in Cancer. So if you do find yourself in a situation where there is scope to be irritated, I just think it's very important to ground yourself. Just focus on the basic facts. Focus on the things that you know and trust, and stick to things that you understand. So if you're talking about something, discussing things, don't talk about things you don't know about. Now, another person might claim they know about it, and so it's not important for you to know about it. You should just listen to them. But that's not the way it should be. You stick to what you know. And ideally, if there are any discussions today, any forms of communication, they should take place on familiar ground. It's certainly not a day for going off on adventures. And when you are on familiar ground, you are going to be really in a strong position. You're going to be someone who is difficult to get the better of. And also, on familiar ground, you're just cleverer, you're more talented, you're able to tune into who you are, and you're able to make the most of what you've been given. So that is another reason to be not to be adventurous. If you are adventurous, if you go somewhere different, if you break your routine, perhaps the best you can hope for is mediocrity. But if you stick to what you know, you stay in places that you know and understand, perhaps even stick with people you know and understand, then you'll be on best form. And so, in a way, whether or not it's a good day depends on what you do. If you are adventurous and try new things out, perhaps try to meet new people, then I don't think could be a pretty awful day. It could be a very frustrating day. But if you stick to what you know and trust, then I think today could be great. Aquarius, we have a sesquiquadrate aspect between Mars and Saturn. Now, that might sound really obscure. That's why on the thumbnail I've got SQQ. That's sort of an abbreviation for a sesquiquadrate. So that's when Mars and Saturn are 135 degrees apart. And it is a tense aspect. And it's likely to have some impact on you. And the reason it's going to have some impact on you, well, it's because, Saturn is your ruler. Saturn rules Aquarius. It's not Neptune, by the way. I mean, Neptune is sort of a modernism, this idea that... sorry, not Neptune. It's Uranus, isn't it? Uranus is supposed to rule Aquarius. But Uranus is a discovered planet, and Uranus doesn't rule anything, in my opinion. It's Saturn that rules Aquarius. And so with this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, you may be under a little bit of pressure. I mean, if you think about it logically, Mars, which is the planet of aggression, can be the planet of dynamism, but it can be quite irritating at the same time, is sesquiquadrate your Saturn. And so that might represent just something today that is annoying you. And it may start off with the feeling that maybe someone else is annoying you, or it could just be some detail that you didn't really want to have to bother with is just there, and you have to deal with it, and you don't appreciate it. And you could say, well, just that's the way it is, just get through today. But maybe you need to be a little more proactive. If something is annoying you, then you should ask yourself, well, what is it about? It may well be that you can actually do something about it, and maybe you are being challenged. You're perhaps being challenged to take some kind of action, and it may not be the kind of action that is easy to take. And I'm not talking about any kind of action which is dangerous. I mean, Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn can be a bit dangerous. I mean, doing something that is risky, careless, stupid. I mean, I suppose that can happen with Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. But if you can take action in a responsible way, and in a way that is patient and is very deliberate, I think that you actually, in the end, can get good results. But it might just feel that things are difficult, and if something is difficult, then use your brain. Actually, your brain is on quite good form at the moment. The moon is making a mutual reception to Mars, so it's not all bad. Mars moving into Cancer. It's and being sesquiquadrate Saturn, of course. But the thing is, Mars is moving out of Leo into Cancer, and so that means that the moment that happens, Moon and Mars are in mutual reception, and that does, I think, give a boost to your intellect, and also it probably gives a boost to your communication skills. You can be very down to earth and clear in terms of what you want, and I think that people will listen to you, and if you need help or advice, I think that kind of help and advice will be available. But just keep it simple. Focus on things that are real. You don't want to get help and advice over things that are abstract or relate to other people's opinion. So perhaps a good idea for getting help and advice over something quite uncontroversial, where you absolutely know there is a right answer. They either know the answer or they don't know the answer. If it's something where it's a matter of opinion, so for example, if you're getting financial advice, well, that might not be such a good idea because today Mercury is square Neptune. So Mercury square Neptune, a lot of people have a lot of different opinions, and some of these opinions are very subjective, and many of these opinions are going to be based on falsehoods and, in certain cases, I suppose, lies. I mean, I'm not saying that is the case, but so if you need yes and no answers, I think you can find them. But if you're looking for something more complicated, then maybe not. So that gives you an idea about what today is about, and it's always good to be well informed. And I think you can gather information today, and I think you can do it very well. But don't take the information necessarily at face value. You need to sort of work with it. Now, another thing happening today is Mars moving out of Leo. So Mars has been in Leo, which is, of course, your opposite sign since the beginning of November. So last couple of months Mars has been in Leo, and now it moves out of Leo into Cancer, and Mars doesn't return to Leo until the end of April. So you've got 3 months, in fact nearly 4 months with Mars in Cancer. So with Mars moving out of Leo, that might actually take some pressure off you. Because, we've had this Mars opposition Pluto, with Mars in Leo opposition Pluto, and that's been a bit difficult, I think, and it could have been difficult in terms of relationships and other people. But now Mars is moving into Cancer. It kind of takes the pressure off. It may be that there's less focus on certain relationships, or people are less stubborn, people are more reasonable, and they're not such an immediate problem, perhaps, as they used to be. Of course, I do understand that Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn today. So today, yes, it's true that certain people could be problematic and they could be irritating. But Mars has moved out of Leo, and as that sesquiquadrate breaks up, by tomorrow, day after, you'll find that I think that people are less irritating, and you might realize that this is perhaps part of a longer term effect lasting through until April, when perhaps you don't have to worry so much about certain other people. Yeah, they had been annoying in the past, but are they going to stay annoying? I don't really think so. And another thing, Aquarius, is, do think about what you can do and how you publicize what you do. I think that is actually very important, because there are certain things you're really good at that people need to know about. And I'm not necessarily talking about today, that there's absolutely something you must do today, but having said it, I think that today you are actually quite good at communicating. So if there's something you can do, the world needs to know about it. I mean, even if you don't have immediate connection with other people, you can do work on something, and you can prepare perhaps to bring something out into the open. Yeah, something you're good at, something that is going to be appreciated, because things have changed. And as 2025 unfolds, people will start to realize, what you can do, and it's certainly not a time for hiding your light under a bushel. Pisces, we have Mars moving out of Leo and into Cancer, and I think this is a good thing. Mars moving into Cancer. Cancer is a water sign. Mars is moving into a water sign. Mars might be fallen in Cancer because it's exalted in Capricorn, therefore fallen in the opposite sign. But it still rules the watery triplicity. I mean, I understand there are different ways of evaluating the rulership of elements. but certainly looking at William Lilly's Christian Astrology, he makes it clear that Mars rules the water signs, all of the water signs. And so Mars gets dignity by moving into Cancer. And of course, you as a Pisces are a water sign, and water is an element that you are familiar with. So for some people, Mars moving into Cancer may not be a particularly good thing. It might make them angry, over-emotional, over-defensive. But I think in your case, no. I think that Mars moving into Cancer is something that you can deal with. Especially as Mars is starting to move backwards. It's starting to make a trine to Neptune. That's something we've got later in the week, Mars trine Neptune. I think that Mars trine Neptune could be a problem for other people, but I don't think it's going to be a problem for you. And I think it just allows you to just join the flow, to understand the flow. And as a Pisces, things actually are becoming clearer. And if you want things to happen, I think you can make them happen. And as a Pisces, that in order to get your way, you don't have to be sort of direct and upfront. There are a number of ways of achieving your ambitions. And, very often you can be subtle about it. You can look at an obstacle, realize you don't have to confront it head on, that you can... I suppose it's like, if you're going down a road and there's an obstacle in front of you, so what? You just get off the road, do a detour, but you get there in the end. And that's perhaps how Mars moving back into Pisces does work. So I think that you're going to feel stronger. You might even feel a bit healthier as well, because Mars in Leo... And it's from a Pisces perspective, Mars in Leo is perhaps a little bit difficult. There may have been some issue regarding health since the beginning of November, and it may be when Mars moves into Cancer, you're less worried about it. Or it may not be about health. It may be an obsession you had. Perhaps you developed some obsession since the beginning of November, something you thought was really important. And it was starting to occur to you that maybe you were exaggerating, and now with Mars moving into Cancer, you can perhaps be more relaxed, and that's Mars in a water sign. Mars finally being able to let go because it is in Cancer, and Mars is retrograde. Of course, it's moving backwards, and that with Mars going retrograde, that's all the more reason to do things in a roundabout way. You don't have to take direct action or direct initiatives. Now, the moon is in Aries today, and moon stays in Aries certainly for the next 24 hours, and the moon is in mutual reception to Mars. And so with that moon mutual reception Mars, that indicates to me that you can get your way, and that particularly applies to money. So if money is important to you, or there's a financial issue that is cropping up that is taking up a lot of your time and attention, then today with this Moon-Mars mutual reception, there seems to be an opportunity to sort it out. I suppose it's Monday, it's a new week, the first full working week of the new year starting. So with that Moon-Mars mutual reception, I think that looks good. So if there has been something worrying you, or some money is owed to you, or something hasn't been made clear to you financially, now with that Moon-Mars mutual reception, I think you can actually deal with it very quickly. So, it might feel like something you don't want to do, but if you have a chance to do it, it may just be one phone call to the right person or the right organization, and you can make yourself feel a whole lot better. So do think about that. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and I now want to look at today, January the 6th, from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And The first hexagram I got was a hexagram 64, which is before completion. So the image we have here is perhaps crossing a river, a big river, and we're trying to get to the far bank. And there's always the question of, can we make it? And do we have the strength to make it? Do we have the subtlety to make it? Are we going to be distracted? So it may be a situation this Monday that you just feel that you're in the middle of doing something, you're nearly finished, but you are not quite there, and you may be concerned about whether you are going to make it, and it is important to be focused. But there are two moving lines, and the fifth line moves and the sixth line moves. And those two lines, the fifth and the sixth lines, do indicate actually that you have completed the task. You are on the point of completing the task. And that kind of makes sense because with the I Ching, when you look at the hexagrams in the I Ching, they kind of start at the bottom and they go up. And the top lines, the fifth and the sixth lines, they represent perhaps the end of the motion. And if it's before completion, you'd think that as you move to the fifth and the sixth lines, you are moving towards actual completion. And with the fifth line moving, it really does indicate that something is changing, that you actually have done the job. And you're feeling that really this is 2025 as well. You've made the transition from 2024 to 25. You've arrived and you're perhaps feeling quite optimistic about it. Things are starting to work. There are real possibilities. So note the difference between that and what the astrology was saying. Astrology, we got Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn can be a frustrating influence, but that frustration of Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn perhaps isn't shown by the I Ching, at least to begin with. And so there is a lot of optimism, I think, that you have arrived. But the trouble is the sixth line moves. And the sixth line, well, it's saying the same thing in one sense, that you've had some kind of victory. You've had some kind of success. You've arrived. You've made a transition. But the sixth line is saying, don't be complacent. And the imagery used with the sixth line, with the top line, is about eating, perhaps having a celebratory feast or having a celebratory drink and being relaxed. It's done. It's over. We're over the worst. But it's important not to be complacent. Yes, you have been successful. You have crossed the river. But just because you cross the river doesn't mean everything is fine. If you are complacent, things could go wrong. You might even be thrown back. You might have to retreat. So be vigilant. Be ever vigilant. And so consider what might go wrong, and don't get drunk, literally or metaphorically, and just be very aware, and be very aware of the kind of responsibilities that you are expected to take. So if you've made a big change, rather than just be happy about it, it's all happened with New Year, we have to think, okay, New Year, new responsibilities, and yeah, there's going to be a new hexagram after that because the top two lines move. And the hexagram this moves to is hexagram number 47, which is oppression. So oppression, if you look at the symbol of oppression, you can see it. You've got top three lines, that is the lake. The bottom three lines is the abyss. So that kind of represents a hole in the lake. So whatever, a sinkhole or something, all the water from the lake is draining out. And so that might be one way of looking at oppression. But I think that what we are oppressed by is what we have to do. And so that's in contrast to the top line of a previous hexagram. So the top line of a previous hexagram was perhaps about being complacent, feeling we could just relax because it's done, we've crossed the river, it's a new era, it's 2025. And then now we're seeing what we really have to do. And oppression means there is a task that has to be continued with. And Greg Winkup, in his translation of the I Ching, he doesn't actually call this hexagram 47, he doesn't call it oppression, he calls it burdened. And burdened, okay, it doesn't sound good, but it's constructive, and it is about the burden we are carrying. So having made that change, we have extra responsibilities. And rather than get drunk, rest on our laurels, we have to accept those responsibilities and continue with these responsibilities. And don't worry, we will move forward and we will make the most of it. And if we understand what we need to do, then we're going to be well satisfied with the way things work out in the end. And it's now time to, I think, look at Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. But what I want to look at first is the certification. You know, I wasn't sure when the election results were going to be certified. So this is, I'm not a great expert on this, but it's when I think it's when the votes from the Electoral College, they're counted, and the vice president's role is to certify the results. So it's kind of really tough for Kamala Harris, having been a candidate in the in last year's election. She's now going to have to certify the results, which make Trump president. And so, as far as the time of the certification, I wasn't really sure. I think it starts about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But honestly, I don't really know. I did some basic looking around. Maybe this chart is right, but the time is perhaps approximate. But anyway, this is when the process starts. And so these results are certified with Mars just moving into Cancer, with Mars making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. There's a certain grimness, isn't there, to this certification, a certain frustration in terms of what the day is like. But still, nothing is going to change, short of some freak tragedy that I certainly haven't picked up on. Donald Trump is going to be today. The results will be certified, and that's kind of the final stage before the inauguration on January the 20th. And it is also Kamala Harris's final act as really important act as vice president. I mean, you could say that really this is what her vice presidency is all about. I mean, she was there to make way for Donald Trump. Maybe, it was her destiny to be chosen as a Democratic candidate, someone who was such a poor candidate. I mean, many people have said that Kamala Harris was, the worst presidential candidate ever. I mean, I think it might be a slight exaggeration. Certainly the worst presidential candidate in living memory. I don't know about the 19th century. But maybe this is her destiny, to make way for Donald Trump. So this is perhaps her day of destiny, and what her life was all about, maybe. And I think we kind of see this if we compare Kamala Harris's chart with the certification chart. So here is Kamala Harris's chart, and there is the positions of the planets when they're certified. So Kamala Harris has her Venus, has her midheaven at 2 degrees 24 Pisces. And so Venus is exactly on her midheaven, close to her midheaven, when she certifies it. And so Venus on the midheaven, you could say that's a sign of a female leader, female vice president, and this is a Venus on the midheaven. That is the peak of it. I mean, Jupiter on the midheaven can also be the peak of something. Jupiter on the midheaven, by the way, in my experience, can be when you get a job or when you lose a job. And I mean, I'm not saying that she loses her job on January the 6th, but she signs off on her own defeat. And a woman signing off on her own defeat, and it happens to be the peak of her vice presidency. This is what it's all about. So that's Venus on the midheaven, and you can see that perhaps some of the pain for her when she has to sign off on Trump's victory. So look at Saturn. Saturn is at 1459 Pisces. So Saturn is very close to her Chiron, and so she has got Chiron in the 10th. In the 10th house. So the 10th house is about career and her ambitions, and perhaps it's some wound regarding her career and her ambitions, which may relate to her parents. So, she had two relatively successful parents, certainly in terms of academia, and it's often been said that maybe she's just not as intelligent as her parents. That was perhaps part of the problem. She wasn't able to. I mean, okay, in terms of political office, she did very well becoming vice president, but she was trying very hard to do her best, and Saturn is conjunct her Chiron, and there is that wound, and Saturn is on her Uranus Pluto, on her opposition her Uranus Pluto midpoint. So I know that these are outer planets, but I think for her, it is something that is probably very painful, and it's going to be a painful day for her. And it's not just because it's a painful day of having to certify or sign off on your opponent's victory, but it's painful because I think it says something about what's happening psychologically. And she's just had Mercury also crossing her descendant. I mean, it's not exactly there, but it's close. And so that is the enemy. That is Donald's victory, perhaps. So I just thought I'd say something about her transits on that day. Additionally, I've just said that Venus is on her midheaven, and there was in terms of solar arc direction, her solar arc, looking at her solar arc directed. There is her solar arc directed midheaven is at 3 degrees Pisces. So let me just show you 3 degrees Taurus. So let me just compare the two charts of what's happening with her solar arc directed midheaven. So there's her solar arc directed midheaven, and you can see that her solar arc directed midheaven is making a sesquiquadrate to her Venus. So that solar arc directed midheaven sesquiquadrate Venus would have been exact probably at the time of the election, but still it's pretty close. So there is that Venus midheaven connection in her chart, which in this case was her defeat. And I think the fact that the Venus is on her transiting Venus is on her midheaven at the time she's certifying the results kind of acts as a trigger for that solar arc direction. Anyway, that's Kamala Harris and the certification. I assume that from now on I won't really be talking about Kamala Harris's chart anymore. I don't know if she's going to do something else. Is she going to stand? Some people are saying she's going to want to be governor of California. I think she'll lose. Will she get past the primaries if she tries to be governor of California? I think even being governor of California is a bit above her pay grade. So let's look at Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. And I do think that this is an important aspect. And I don't think it's just important for us as individuals. I think it's important for the world at large. Here is the aspect. This is a time for, when the aspect is exact. I make it 1:05 p.m. London time, and so you can see that Mars is at 29:58 Cancer, Saturn is at 14:58 Pisces, so they're exactly sesquiquadrate, and so this can be a time when things could be frustrating in the world, when there could be arguments, anger, in certain cases death and destruction. It's not easy, Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, and we can look at it in terms of the 90-degree dial. So if you look at it, that's actually a 30-degree dial. So let's just look at it in terms of a 90-degree dial. So as a 90-degree dial, which is a sort of fourth harmonic thing. So if you look at Mars and Saturn, you see their opposition on the 90-degree dial. So on a 90-degree dial, which is fourth harmonic, semisquares and sesquiquadrates are shown as oppositions, and you can see how tense it is. And it's interesting that this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, this chart was of course set for Westminster, and so if you set this chart for London, which this chart is set for London, you can see that Mars is exactly on the IC. Just every chart I look at seems to be bad stuff going on for the UK. I mean, Mars on the IC, if you follow that line down, Mars will be on fairly close to the IC on Paris, but it does affect London again. And I'm going to be looking at England's chart right at the end of this video, because first of all I wanted to consider a few people who may be impacted by this Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus, just a few people in the news, and one person who I think could be impacted by this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn is Marine Le Pen, the French politician who's leader of the National Rally, sort of right-wing party, Get confused about that, because some of their policies are pretty left-wing. It's always difficult to think about left and right-wing, isn't it? So you see that she's got her Mars at 29:49 Cancer. So Marine Le Pen has her Mars return around the time of today, and she has got Saturn sesquiquadrate her Mars. So her Mars is really getting hit. And so this could be a very frustrating day. It's a day when Marine Le Pen could be vulnerable, I suppose, to accidents. I suppose it could also be to attacks, assaults and whatever. I mean, I suppose it could be legal assaults, and just a difficult time for her. And if I was advising Marine Le Pen, I would suggest that she's really careful over the next couple of days while Saturn is hitting her Mars. And another French politician who's being impacted by this is Jean-Luc Mélenchon. So Jean-Luc Mélenchon, again, I don't know much about French politics, but he's in Parliament. He's a leader of the sort of left bloc, and is sort of veteran, sort of left-wing politician, and he has got his Mars at 0 degrees 35 Leo. So in fact, his Mars and Marine Le Pen's Mars are very close to each other. So I assume they don't get on very well with one another, or they certainly have a lot to do with each other. And in some ways, they perhaps share the same frustration with the machinations of the president, Emmanuel Macron. But he has got Mars. He has also got a Mars return, and he's got Saturn sesquiquadrate Mars. So whatever I've said for Marine Le Pen, I would have said the same for Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and possibly more so, because in Marine Le Pen's chart we were talking about Mars, and sort of Marine Le Pen is a woman, so maybe obviously, so she might project that Mars. That may say something about the men around her. But with Jean-Luc Mélenchon, that's his Mars, and so it perhaps might be more direct. This aspect, this Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate. There are a couple of other politicians that might be impacted by this aspect. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico. He has been in the news a lot. I mean, he got shot earlier in 2024. He has recently visited Moscow. He is clearly an opponent of a war against Ukraine. I think I would have said he's generally fairly supportive of Russia. I mean, I think that you could say that what he's doing is fairly brave. You may not agree with what he's doing, but there's a certain bravery there, isn't there? I mean, he's already been shot once, and we're living in dangerous times. And he does have his Mars return. So there's Robert Fico's Mars at 0 degrees 9 Leo. Same place as Jean-Luc Mélenchon, same place, very similar place to Marine Le Pen. And so with his Mars return, with Saturn sesquiquadrate his Mars, yeah, he could be under a lot of pressure. And having been shot once, I think he's actually said that someone tried to assassinate him again. But there may be further threats. You know, I suppose they'd be happening pretty soon. I mean, with this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, so he is someone who I think does have to be careful over the next couple of days. Another politician who I've looked at before is Nayib Bukele. So Nayib Bukele, he's president of El Salvador. Controversial, perhaps, but it could be said he's done wonders for his country. I mean, his crime rate has fallen off a cliff because he just sent everyone to prison. And of course, he's adopted Bitcoin as a national currency. He's watered that down a bit, but El Salvador has two national currencies, the US dollar and Bitcoin. El Salvador doesn't have its own currency. And so he was born on a last quarter moon. So his moon is at 0 degrees Taurus. His sun is at 0 degrees Leo. So over the last couple of days, Nayib Bukele has had Mars conjunct his sun node conjunction. He's also had Mars square his moon. And at the right now, he's got Saturn really hitting him quite hard. Saturn is going to be hitting his moon. It's going by sesquiquadrate. By Saturn's going to, let's get it right. Saturn is at the middle of Pisces. So Saturn is making a sesquiquadrate to his moon, and it's making, a semi-square to his moon, making a sesquiquadrate to his sun. And so the next couple of days, next week, could actually be very difficult for Nayib Bukele, and he has to be careful, I would have said. He might be under a lot of pressure, like those French politicians I was talking about. And anyone else? Sean Combs. Don't know anything about him, but people keep talking about him, and I'm not going to actually say anything about him except just point out Sean Combs. He's had kind of a lot of legal troubles. I'm not going to say anything because I don't know anything about it. But anyway, he has got his Mars at 29 Capricorn. So Sean Combs has Mars opposition Mars, and Saturn is going to be semi-square his Mars. So he is someone who could be under pressure. Turning to the royal family, the British royal family. Firstly, there's King Charles. King Charles has his moon at 0 degrees Taurus. So this means that Mars has just made a square to his moon, and it also means that Saturn is making a sesquiquadrate to his moon. Now that may say something about his country, and I will be talking about England in a moment. But Saturn hitting his moon, he doesn't seem to be too happy at the moment. It may be just I don't know, something bothering him. I don't want to speculate. because he's just had Mars square his moon, and other people may be picking up on this. And I'm thinking particularly of Prince George. So Prince George is William and Catherine's oldest son. I've looked at his chart before. I will always express my view that I don't think he's going to be a suitable monarch. I don't think he'll want to be king. That's my view. I think he's too sensitive, and for other reasons, but I mean, maybe it will be beside the point by the time he reaches a stage where he can take over from his father. Maybe we'll be a republic by then. I don't know, but I'm not really concerned about what's happening to him. It's more perhaps what he's perhaps picking up on. And the thing about Prince George is that he was born on a full moon, and there is his full moon. Moon at 28 Capricorn, Sun at 29:59. Now, this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, remember, let me just look at this, remind us that Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn is at, where's it gone? 29:58 Cancer. And so when you look at Prince George's chart, he's got Sun at 29:59 Cancer. So this hits his Sun with only a 1 minute orb, and it's hitting his full moon. So I think something's bothering him, something he's picking up on. I do think he's a sensitive child, and I think he's picking up on a lot, and maybe he's picking up on something within the royal family. It's something going on in the royal family, something going on in his parents, and I think he may find it at some level quite distressing. I don't think it's necessarily about him, but it's about what he's picking up on, because I think he is sensitive with that full moon. And so perhaps we need to see him as a thermometer, his chart as a thermometer. There's maybe something going on with the royal family, and maybe his country as well, but perhaps particularly with his royal family. Remembering we've already noticed that Charles, his grandfather, has got Saturn, that Saturn is sesquiquadrate, is semi-square his grandfather's moon at the moment. And I want to also look at an old favourite, which is Volodymyr Zelensky, and President of Ukraine. So Volodymyr Zelensky has his Mars at 0 degrees 15 Leo. So same position as Jean-Luc Mélenchon, same position as Marine Le Pen. So with his Mars opposition, Mars, so he's just having his Mars return, and Saturn is making a sesquiquadrate to his Mars. So again, this indicates that he has to be careful at the moment, and it's also making, I think that's the main aspect. I don't think there's anything else that I really want to talk about. But he is under pressure, and look at his Chiron. He's got Mars Chiron square. So Saturn is going to be square. Is going to be semi-square his Chiron. It's going to be sesquiquadrate his Mars. It's going to be square his Mars Chiron midpoint, and so things could unwind further. I mean, it may be something to do with the military situation in Ukraine. I mean, from what I can see, the Russians are, they're constantly moving west. I don't know, is Pokrovsk going to fall quite soon? I mean, Pokrovsk is this town in western Ukraine that is increasingly surrounded. It's considered to be very important. It's not Western Ukraine, Western Donetsk. It's in eastern Ukraine, but it's in the west of the Donetsk region of the Donetsk Oblast. And if Pokrovsk falls, it's a real disaster, and it may be about to fall. But something perhaps happens in a sort of a military sense, which could be difficult. And maybe that's going to undermine his leadership, or it may just be something political. I mean, but as with Volodymyr Zelensky, I mean, it's amazing he survived so long. I mean, really amazing. And his Mars has been hit again and again and again by Pluto. He's still there, but now Saturn is hitting his Mars, and he's just had his Mars return. So, I mean, I suppose, is he going to get through this? I mean, I suppose he's got through a lot in the past, but still, he does seem to be under a lot of pressure. And maybe this pressure is also being picked up by NATO and NATO's Secretary General. So here's NATO's Secretary General, and NATO's Secretary General, he has his Mars at Mark Rutte. He took over from Jens Stoltenberg, and Mark Rutte has his Mars at 0 degrees Scorpio. In other words, he has his Mars square Zelensky's Mars. So what's happening to Mark Rutte? He's just had Mars square his Mars. Now he's going to have Saturn sesquiquadrate his Mars. I may say it's just something about his life, and his private life, but it could say something about his formal position as Secretary General of NATO and what's going on in NATO. Perhaps it's this awareness that something really bad is happening in Ukraine that may also reflect what's happening to Zelensky, because his Mars is square Zelensky's Mars. Maybe Rutte, by the way, doesn't get on too well with Zelensky with their Mars square Mars. We won't know. They're all supposed to be friends, but who knows how the two men get on with each other. And finally, I want to look at the UK and make an observation about the UK, which did occur to me. So the Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, I set this chart for Westminster, and so you can see that Mars is exactly on the IC in this chart, and so that means that Mars is opposition the midheaven, and you've got Saturn semi-square the midheaven, Saturn sesquiquadrate the IC. We've also looked at the fact that King Charles has Saturn sesquiquadrate his moon. That may say something about his country. Charles is the land, and so the moon may be the ordinary people in Charles's chart. But things are not good in the UK, and things are not happy. And this is also reflected in the chart of England. I mean, I take the English chart, Christmas Day 1066, because I know it's not about Scotland and Wales. This is about when William the Conqueror was crowned on Christmas Day 1066. And by the way, I might keep saying this, but it's set for December the 31st because this program seems to encourage me to convert Julian to Gregorian. But if you convert that back to the Julian calendar, it's December the 25th. So this is the English chart, which I think has relevance to the UK. And England's Venus is at 2951 Capricorn. Now, Venus is the symbol. It could symbolize women. It could symbolize particular women. I mean, I think that when Pluto was conjunct England's Venus sort of just about a year ago, that was all the stuff about Princess Catherine and how she disappeared, and there were concerns about her health, and then it turned out the fact that she'd been diagnosed with having cancer. And so that might have been how Pluto conjunct Venus was affecting the country, because I suppose Venus represents a youngish woman, and so with Pluto conjunct Venus, she's arguably the most important woman in the country in terms of recognition, and so it's perhaps not surprising that this national woman, Pluto conjunct her Venus, that's how it was experienced. But there's something else going on. Now, I don't live in the UK, and so I'm not quite sure about the significance of these things, and I'm kind of reliant on YouTube videos, and I don't really know what it's like living in the country because I haven't lived there for over 5 years. But I haven't lived there since 2003. Actually, I haven't been there since 5 years, for over 5 years, nearly 6 years. But there is a scandal brewing in Britain regarding grooming gangs, and correct me if I've got some of the details wrong, but there's in a sort of a northern town in England, there was this story about young girls of white ethnicity being groomed by Muslim men. And the view is that the establishment has been turning a blind eye, and the establishment includes the police. And I'm just telling you the story as it's reported. I'm not giving an opinion and on its truth or not, but there seems to be some really genuine concerns here. And there is the question: who is covering it up? And perhaps senior politicians have been covering up, senior police officers have been covering up. And so potentially it is a scandal which the British government doesn't seem to want to have anything to do with it. I mean, some channels are suggesting that it's basically been almost an invitation to rape, two-tier policing, I suppose. The police are turning a blind eye to the behaviour of certain ethnic groups. Again, I'm just telling it as I've seen it reported. And so it's kind of not surprising then that we have Venus at 29 Capricorn and having Saturn semi-square this Venus. Venus could represent young women in Britain. Young women perhaps being abused, being taken advantage of. And so Saturn is semi-square Venus. And also Monday, Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn. That's when that Venus really does get hit. So it may be that this is now the time when this whole scandal is coming out into the open, and it's actually having an impact on public opinion. So that might be one way of looking at it, as Saturn and Mars hit the Venus. Though I suppose we should also look back at the royal family, and I suppose it may say something about Princess Catherine and what Princess Catherine is doing, and is she under pressure? Her son seems to be under pressure, so that may be another way of looking at Venus. But overall, with this Mars-Saturn sesquiquadrate, it does seem to put Britain under more pressure. A lot of people under pressure with this Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn, but I just did want to mention that observation about the UK-England 1066 chart. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for today. I hope the video made some sense to you, that you enjoyed it, and if you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd of course be very grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. Anyway, I will talk to you again tomorrow.